I had been planning the hike for weeks. The weather was supposed to be clear, the trail wasn't known for being too hard, and I thought it would be a good way to push myself after spending too much time indoors. I picked a loop trail that cut deep into the forest and wrapped around a ridge before circling back down. It was marked as moderate, about 12 miles long, with a mix of wooded paths, rocky climbs, and open sections along the ridge. I thought it sounded like the right balance between a challenge and something I could handle alone. I packed light but carefully. I had a small pack with a hydration bladder, a first aid kit, a knife, energy bars, trail mix, a headlamp, a poncho, and an extra layer in case the weather turned. I also had a paper map of the area, folded in a plastic sleeve. My phone had GPS, but I knew the service would cut in and out once I got deeper into the forest. I started early in the morning to give myself plenty of daylight. The first few miles were easy. The trail was wide, soft with pine needles and still damp from dew. Birds were calling above me, and the air felt cool and fresh. The forest was thick but not suffocating, and I found myself enjoying the quiet rhythm of walking. I liked the crunch of gravel here and there, the steady swing of my arms, the sound of my own breath. I stopped once to drink and check the map, not because I needed to, but because it felt good to know exactly where I was. After about 3 miles, the trail narrowed and began to climb. The trees thinned out, and the ground became rockier. Roots twisted across the dirt, and I had to watch my footing carefully. I was sweating more, my shirt sticking to my back, and my thighs burned with the incline. But I liked that feeling, the steady push upward. Every time I thought I should take a break, I told myself I'd keep going until the trail leveled. Eventually, I reached a stretch where the trees opened up, and I could see across a wide valley. The ridge rose in front of me, sharp and uneven, with jagged rocks jutting from the slopes. The trail snaked up toward it, disappearing behind boulders and clusters of brush. The view was worth the climb so far, but it also reminded me how far I had to go. I checked my watch and saw it was almost noon. I had made decent time, but I still had more than half the loop ahead. I ate a quick snack before starting the ridge section. The climb grew steeper and I slowed down. Loose stones slid under my boots, and I had to grab at rocks or branches to steady myself. My legs shook a little with the effort, but I kept going, telling myself that once I reached the top, the worst of the uphill would be behind me. When I finally pulled myself onto the ridge, the wind hit me hard. It was much stronger up there, sweeping over the exposed rock, rattling the few scraggly trees that clung to the edges. The trail was marked by faded blazes painted on rocks, and it wasn't always clear where it went. At times I had to stop and scan for the next mark, tracing a path over uneven ground. The view was incredible. The valley stretched endlessly, forests rolling like green waves, and far in the distance I could see the faint shimmer of a lake. For a while I let myself enjoy it. I walked carefully along the ridge, keeping close to the safer side, avoiding the drop-offs. The wind howled, and my pack straps tugged against my shoulders as if trying to push me off balance. I had been on the ridge for maybe 40 minutes when I realized I hadn't seen a blaze in a while. I stopped and looked around. The rocks and brush all looked the same, and I didn't see any paint marks. I backtracked a little, scanning the stones, but nothing stood out. My stomach tightened. I wasn't lost, not yet, but I knew how quickly that could change. I pulled out my map and tried to match the landscape to the lines on paper. The ridge was marked, but it wasn't detailed enough to show every twist and rise. I thought I might have drifted too far to the right, toward the drop-off. I decided to angle left, climbing a bit higher, hoping I'd find the trail again. At first it seemed to work. I spotted a faint footpath worn into the dirt between rocks, and I followed it. But soon it faded out, swallowed by scrub. I kept moving, telling myself the main trail had to be close, but the ground grew more uneven and the rocks sharper. I stopped again, breathing hard, my pulse loud in my ears. That was when I realized how quiet everything was. The wind still blew, but it seemed thinner, weaker, as if even that sound had pulled back. I couldn't hear birds anymore. The forest below was just a dark carpet. No movement, no calls. I suddenly felt very small, standing alone on that ridge with no clear path forward. I forced myself to sit and drink water. Panic only made things worse. I reminded myself. I studied the map again, trying to guess my position. If I kept heading left, I should intersect the main trail eventually. That was the logic. Trails didn't just vanish, but in the back of my head, doubt pressed harder with each minute. I started again, moving slower, checking every few steps for signs of a blaze or footprints. The rocks cut into my boots, and the brush scratched my legs. Sweat stung my eyes. My watch showed almost 3 o'clock. I had lost more than 2 hours wandering off course. Finally, I reached a slope that dropped into dense forest. It wasn't where I wanted to go, but I thought if I descended, I might find a clearer path. I started down carefully, grabbing branches and roots, sliding on loose dirt. The air grew cooler in the shade, and the smell of damp earth rose around me. At the bottom, the trees closed in. The ridge was hidden behind me, and the light was dimmer. The ground was soft and uneven, littered with fallen branches. There was no trail. I walked anyway, weaving between trunks, listening for anything that sounded like water or people, but all I heard was my own breathing and the crack of sticks under my boots. After another hour, I admitted to myself that I was lost. I had been moving in circles, I was sure of it. The forest looked the same in every direction. My legs ached, and a dull throb had started in my shoulders from the pack. I thought about staying put, but I didn't want to stop yet. I felt like if I just pushed farther, I might break through to something recognizable. But the deeper I went, the worse it got. The underbrush thickened, clawing at my clothes. The ground sloped unpredictably, dropping into gullies, rising into ridges, each one leading to more trees. The sky above was fading into late afternoon, the light turning gold and then dim. I stopped when I realized how dark it had gotten. My chest tightened with fear. I pulled out my headlamp and strapped it on, but the beam felt weak against the endless black trunks. The forest at night was nothing like the forest in daylight. Every sound was sharper, closer. Twigs snapped, leaves rustled, branches creaked. My mind wanted to attach shapes to the noises, but all I saw was shifting shadows. I forced myself to find a spot that seemed less exposed. I cleared a patch of ground near a fallen log and sat down. I ate a granola bar even though my stomach was tight with anxiety. I drank sparingly from my water, trying to plan how long it would last. I had enough food for another day if I rationed, but the water worried me. The night dragged. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard something, footsteps that weren't mine, the distant cry of an animal, the sudden crash of something moving fast through the brush. My heart would race, and I'd sit up, straining to listen, but the sounds always faded into silence. I don't know how much I slept, maybe an hour here and there. When the first light returned, I felt groggy and stiff, but the sight of the pale sky gave me a little hope. I told myself I had to find higher ground, get a better view, and reorient. I climbed a low ridge and scanned the horizon. The forest stretched endlessly, a rolling sea of green. I couldn't see the main trail, but I thought I spotted the shimmer of water far off. That became my new goal. If I reached water, I'd at least have a resource, maybe even find a campsite or cabin. The hike toward it was grueling. Hours passed, my legs heavy, my lips dry. When I finally reached the water, it was a narrow creek cutting through rocks. Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. The water was shallow, running weakly, not enough to fill easily. Still, I cupped my hands and drank, not caring about the risk of parasites. The cold liquid eased the burning in my throat. I followed the creek downstream, reasoning it might lead to a larger river or even people. The terrain forced me to climb over fallen trees, scramble along muddy banks, and wade through spots where the water spread wide and shallow. My boots grew soaked, heavy with each step. By late afternoon, I was exhausted. My legs trembled and I stumbled often. I slipped once on a wet rock and slammed my shin hard enough to draw blood. The sting made my eyes water, but I kept moving. Stopping felt dangerous now, like admitting defeat. The second night fell, and I had no choice but to camp again. This time I huddled under a cluster of thick pines, using the poncho as a crude shelter. I shivered through the night. The cold I decided to take a long hike in late summer of 2019. I was 27 years old, and I had already done plenty of short hikes, but I had never pushed myself to do something that stretched over multiple days. I had some vacation time saved up from work, and instead of spending money on traveling far, I thought it would be a good idea to explore a wilderness area that was only a few hours' drive from my apartment. I lived in the city, but not too far from the mountains, and I had always told myself I would explore the canyons and backcountry when I had the time. This seemed like the right moment. I packed food, water filters, a tent, sleeping bag, first aid kit, cooking gear, maps, compass, and a GPS unit. I had trained my legs a bit by jogging and going on smaller hikes in the weeks before. I told myself I was ready. I was excited, but at the same time nervous. The area I chose was rugged, with canyons that twisted for miles and rocky ridges that dropped steeply into narrow valleys. I had read that people sometimes underestimated how difficult it was. Still, I thought if I was careful and paid attention, I would be fine. I drove out early in the morning, parked at a trailhead, and started down the path. The sky was a hard blue, the sun already sharp. The air was dry. The first day felt great. I followed the marked trail for hours, moving through stretches of forest and open rock. I sweated hard under the sun, but every time I looked around, I felt a mix of freedom and peace. I had brought plenty of water and knew where the first stream crossings were. Everything felt under control. By late afternoon, I found a flat spot near a stream and set up camp. I boiled water for pasta and ate quietly while the shadows grew long. I lay back in my sleeping bag that night, listening to the sound of water moving over rocks. It felt like I had finally stepped away from the noise of the city. I slept deeply. The second day, I wanted to push further off the main trail. I had read about a loop that went down into one of the canyons and then climbed back up to join the main path again. It was not an official trail, more like a route that people followed using old cairns and faint paths. I knew it would be harder, but I wanted the challenge. I studied my map carefully that morning and set off. The path started fine. The ground sloped downward, and I moved through brush and boulders. But as I went deeper, the trail markers became less obvious. Some cairns were knocked over. I kept checking my GPS and map. The canyon walls grew taller on both sides, orange and brown stone rising straight up, trapping heat. The air down there was still and heavy. By midday, sweat soaked through my shirt. I refilled my water bottles at a muddy pool and kept going. As the afternoon wore on, I realized I had misjudged the distance. The canyon floor twisted back and forth, slowing me down. I checked the GPS and saw I was behind schedule. I thought about turning back, but the map showed the loop would eventually climb back to the ridge not too far ahead. I pushed on. The trail finally faded completely into a jumble of rocks and dry brush. I picked my way forward, sometimes climbing over large boulders, sometimes squeezing between thorny plants. My legs were scratched, my arms tired. I told myself to stay calm, but the more I walked, the more I noticed I was no longer exactly sure where the route was. My GPS showed my general position, but the canyon walls blocked the signal at times. The map gave me a rough idea, but the details on the ground didn't always match. The sun slid lower. I still hadn't found the climb that was supposed to lead out of the canyon. My stomach knotted. I stopped to eat a snack and drink water, but it did little to calm me. I had already hiked for hours. I knew if I didn't find a flat place soon, I would be forced to set up camp right in the rough canyon bottom. As light drained from the sky, I picked a sandy patch by a bend in the canyon and pitched my tent. I was too tired to cook much. I ate some trail mix and lay down. The canyon around me was silent, the walls looming like dark cliffs. I felt small and exposed. My thoughts ran in circles about whether I had made a mistake. I tried to sleep, but I kept waking, listening to every scrape of rock or rustle in the brush. In the morning, I told myself I needed to climb out as soon as possible. I packed quickly and started looking for any sign of a trail leading upward. I spotted a narrow gully filled with loose stones that looked like it might rise toward the rim. I started up. Every step sent pebbles sliding down. I had to grab at roots and cracks to keep from slipping. My pack pulled me backward. My legs shook with effort. The climb felt endless, and when I finally looked up, the top still seemed far away. Halfway up, I realized the gully narrowed into a vertical rock face. I stood there breathing hard, staring at the wall. It was too steep. I couldn't climb it safely. My throat was dry, my hands scraped and bleeding from the rock. I had to go back down. The descent was worse. Rocks rolled under my boots, threatening to send me tumbling. By the time I reached the bottom again, my legs were trembling. I sat down in the dirt, shaking with frustration. My water supply was shrinking. The thought of being stuck weighed heavy on me. I tried another route, a side canyon that looked gentler. It started easy, winding upward with sandy footing, but soon the walls closed in, and a dry waterfall blocked the way. The rock face was about 15 feet high. I tested it with my hands, pulling myself up a few feet before my boots slipped on the smooth stone. I fell back down, landing hard. Pain shot through my ankle. I sat clutching it, terrified that I had broken something. After a long few minutes, the pain eased, but the ankle was sore and swollen. I could walk, but with a limp. I spent the rest of that day limping from one dead end to another, each time forced to turn back. The sun was brutal overhead. My tongue felt thick. I rationed my water carefully. The thought of running out clawed at me. That night I barely slept. My ankle throbbed, and my stomach growled with hunger. I knew panic would only make things worse, but it was hard to fight it off. On the fourth day, I woke dizzy. I forced myself to eat a little oatmeal and packed up. I decided to follow the canyon downstream instead of fighting upward. I thought maybe it would lead to a wider valley or even a river. At least moving downstream meant I had a better chance of finding water sources. The canyon floor twisted for miles. Sometimes the path was wide and sandy, other times blocked with boulders. I climbed, crawled, and squeezed through gaps. My ankle slowed me down, but I pushed forward. Hours passed. I found a trickle of water seeping from the rock and drank greedily, filtering what I could. Tasted metallic, but it kept me alive. By late afternoon, I stumbled into a wider stretch where the canyon split into two directions. My map didn't clearly show which branch I should take. I chose the left fork, hoping it would bend toward the main river I had seen on the topo lines. I walked for hours into the fork, only to find it ended in sheer cliffs. I cursed under my breath, fear pressing on me harder. Turning back drained me, but I had no choice. By the time I reached the junction again, the light was fading. I didn't want to waste time setting up my tent, so I rolled out my sleeping bag under a ledge. The night was long. Something moved in the brush nearby. A rabbit, maybe, or something larger. I gripped my knife and stared into the dark, heart racing. My mind filled with images of animals creeping close, but nothing happened. Eventually, exhaustion pulled me into shallow, restless sleep. The next day, I took the right fork. This one seemed more promising. The walls were still steep, but the floor sloped gently. I forced myself onward, even though my legs burned and my shoulders ached from the pack. Around midday, I thought I heard something faint, like a plane far overhead. I stopped and listened. The sound faded quickly, but the realization hit me that nobody could hear me down here. The canyon swallowed all noise. I was alone. Hours later, the canyon opened slightly, revealing a higher ledge with a faint animal trail. I followed it, hoping it might climb out. The trail was narrow, clinging to the wall. One slip would mean falling onto jagged rocks below. I moved slowly, placing each foot with care. My heart pounded so hard I felt it in my throat. At one point, the trail narrowed to a crack barely wider than my boot. I froze, shaking, gripping the rock with both hands. I wanted to go back, but going back felt just as dangerous. I pressed my body against the stone, slid one foot sideways, then the other. Inch by inch, I crossed. When I finally stepped onto wider ground, I collapsed, breathing ragged. The ledge climbed higher until I reached a shelf overlooking the canyon. From there, I finally saw the rim far above. It looked close enough to reach. I started the climb again, grabbing roots and rocks, dragging myself upward despite the pain in my ankle. Every step hurt, but the sight of open sky above kept me going. It took hours, but as the sun dropped low, I pulled myself. I had been hiking for years, but the trip that still haunts me the most started in the late summer of 2017. I was 27 then, in good shape, used to walking long distances and eager to test myself. I had just moved states for a new job, and before starting, I wanted to explore one of the more remote trail systems in the area. I found a loop that looked challenging but manageable. On paper, it was only 22 miles long, a 2-day loop with some steep elevation gain. It passed through old forest, skirted a few ridges, and cut near a river. I figured I would hike half the distance the first day, camp, and finish the second day. The weather was decent when I set out. The morning was cool and gray, the kind of day that makes you feel like you can walk forever without overheating. The forecast had called for light rain late in the evening, but nothing serious. I packed light but not careless: tent, sleeping bag, food for 2 days, a filter for water, and a small first aid kit. I had a good map printed out, though I didn't own a GPS then. I thought I didn't need it since the loop was marked, and I was confident with a compass. I strapped everything on, parked my car at the small lot by the trailhead, and started walking. The first miles were easy. The trail was wide, clear, and well-marked. It passed through tall pine woods with open ground beneath. I could hear birds calling and the occasional rustle of something small darting through leaves. I felt good, like this was exactly the reset I needed before starting my new job. The path climbed slowly, and soon the trees thinned out. I reached a ridge line by late morning, and the view opened wide. Rolling hills stretched far, broken up by rivers and valleys. It was quiet up there, with only the sound of wind moving through the grass. I stopped for a snack, sitting on a rock and letting my pack rest against my legs. It felt like I was the only person out there, though I knew the loop was popular. Still, I hadn't seen another hiker since leaving my car. I assumed I'd cross paths with someone by evening. I didn't think much of it. By midday, clouds began to gather. They moved in faster than I expected, heavy gray ones piling up in the west. The air felt thicker, more humid, and the wind dropped. It made the woods strangely silent as I descended back into tree cover. The quiet felt unnatural, but I tried to shrug it off. I walked faster, hoping to reach the halfway point to camp before rain started. The trail was supposed to cross a river about 11 miles in, and near there was a small clearing marked on the map as a campsite. That was my goal. I kept glancing at my watch, judging the time against the growing darkness in the sky. By mid-afternoon, the first drops hit. They were cold and heavy, pattering against leaves overhead. Within minutes, it turned into steady rain. I stopped to pull out my rain jacket, though it was barely useful against how quickly everything was getting soaked. The trail grew muddy, slick under my boots. I had to watch my steps more carefully, and progress slowed. The woods darkened as the clouds thickened, and I realized with unease that the map didn't show much detail for smaller forks or side paths. A few times I had to stop and double-check which way to go. At one point, I reached a fork that wasn't clear on the map at all. One trail sloped downhill, the other kept straight along the ridge. Neither had markers. I chose the downhill one, reasoning that the river should be in that direction. After about 20 minutes of descending, I realized the path was fading. What had started as a clear track was narrowing to little more than a game trail. I paused under dripping branches and pulled out the map again. My compass showed I was heading roughly west, which should have been right, but the trail itself didn't look maintained. My stomach tightened. The rain made it hard to think. Water ran down my jacket and into my sleeves. I decided to keep going for a bit longer, hoping it would widen out again. Instead, it thinned more until I was pushing through wet brush. Branches slapped my arms and face. My boots sank into soft ground. The sound of rushing water reached me faintly, which gave me some hope that I was near the river crossing. I pressed forward, convinced I could reconnect with the main loop once I reached it. When I finally broke through to the riverbank, it wasn't where I expected. The river was wider, faster, and darker than I imagined. The map showed a smaller crossing, but this looked swollen from rain. The water churned with debris, branches spinning and vanishing downstream. I looked up and down the bank but saw no sign of a bridge or stepping stones. My stomach dropped. I knew I had gone wrong. The campsite wasn't here. I had to decide whether to backtrack uphill to the fork or try to follow the river until I found the crossing. I didn't want to lose time retracing my steps, so I made the mistake of turning downstream. I walked along the bank, slipping in mud, pushing through wet grass. The river roared beside me, and the rain poured down harder, soaking me to the bone. The light dimmed quickly, faster than I expected. It was only a little after 6, but the storm made it feel like dusk. I realized I couldn't keep hunting for the right spot. I had to set camp soon, or I'd risk not being able to at all. I found a small patch of ground a little above the bank, flat enough to pitch my tent. It wasn't ideal, it was close to the water, and the ground was soft, but it was the best I could manage in the downpour. Setting up was miserable. My fingers were stiff from the cold rain, and the tent fabric stuck to itself. By the time I crawled inside, everything I had was damp. I changed into the driest clothes I could, wrapped my sleeping bag around me, and listened to the storm hammer the nylon. The sound was deafening, mixed with the river's endless rush. I barely slept. The ground felt unstable, the river too close. I kept imagining the water rising and sweeping me away. Every crack of thunder jolted me awake. At some point, I must have drifted off because I woke in gray light with my head pounding. The rain had stopped, but fog hung low, thick and white, blurring everything beyond a few yards. My tent and gear were wet, the ground soggy. I ate a cold bar for breakfast, trying to figure my next move. I knew I needed to find the main trail again. My map showed the loop crossing the river at only one spot. If I could get upstream, maybe I'd reach it. I packed up, stuffed my wet gear into the bag, and started walking back from where I had come. But the fog disoriented me. Landmarks I thought I'd notice were hidden. The woods all looked the same, dark trunks rising into gray. I tried using the compass, but without clear paths, I kept circling uneven ground. The hours passed and I grew more anxious. My socks squished in my boots. My stomach ached from the cold food. At one point, I slipped on wet rocks and cut my hand. Blood ran down my wrist before the rain washed it away. The wound wasn't deep, but it stung, and it made me feel weaker. By early afternoon, I knew I was lost, completely lost. I had no trail beneath me, no clear idea where I was in relation to the loop. My map was almost useless without markers. I forced myself to stay calm, but inside I felt panic pressing hard. I decided my best option was to keep following the river upstream, even if it was slow. At least water was constant, and I could refill my bottle. I climbed over rocks and roots, pushed through brush, and sometimes had to wade across side channels. The current was strong, and once I almost lost my footing. Hours blurred into more hours. The fog lifted slightly, but the sky stayed gray, promising more rain. My legs shook with exhaustion, and my stomach growled with hunger. I rationed what little food I had left, chewing slowly to stretch it. When evening came again, I still hadn't found the crossing. I was forced to camp in another damp patch, this time farther from the river. I managed to light a small fire with the driest wood I could find, using matches I had sealed in a plastic bag. The smoke clung to me, and the flames barely warmed, but it felt like life itself. That night, I heard noises in the woods. Not thunder, not rain, different sounds. Branches snapping, something moving through undergrowth. My nerves were raw, and every rustle made me grip the small knife I carried. I didn't sleep at all, staring at the dim glow of coals until morning. The next day was worse. My legs ached, my shoulders burned from the pack, and my cut hand throbbed. The fog was gone, but now the sun baked the wet woods, turning them humid and suffocating. Mosquitoes swarmed. Every step felt heavier. I began to wonder if I would ever find the trail again. Late that afternoon, as I scrambled along the bank, I spotted something through the trees. A log, cut by a saw, lying across the ground. My chest tightened. It meant people had been here and maybe the trail wasn't far. I pushed toward it, forcing myself through thorny brush. After about 20 minutes, I stumbled onto a faint but real path. Relief flooded me so hard my knees almost buckled. I didn't know yet if it was the loop, but it was something. I dropped my pack. I had been planning the trip for months. It was supposed to be a personal challenge, a way to test myself, to see how far I could go alone. I wanted to hike a long section of a trail that cut through remote mountains in late summer. The guidebook warned about the rough terrain, the long distances between water sources, and the lack of cell service. That was exactly what I wanted. I craved something difficult, something that would push me. I packed carefully. My backpack held a tent, sleeping bag, food for over a week, a water filter, maps, a compass, and the usual survival gear. I weighed everything twice, trimmed down where I could. But even so, the pack pressed heavy into my shoulders when I first shouldered it at the trailhead. The sun was high, the air hot, but the excitement kept me moving forward. The first few days were almost peaceful. I hiked through thick forests where sunlight broke in shards through the leaves. I crossed small creeks where the water was so clear I could see smooth stones at the bottom. The nights were cool, filled with the sound of crickets, owls, and the rustle of wind through trees. I felt tired but good. By the fourth day, the trail grew steeper. The climb was constant, switchback after switchback up a mountain face. I sweated until my shirt clung to me. My calves burned. When I finally reached the ridge, the view spread out like an endless painting. Miles of valleys and mountains, the world rolling away under a wide sky. I camped near the ridge that night, exhausted but proud. It was the fifth day when the first signs of trouble appeared. The guidebook had noted a spring near the trail, but when I reached it, the spring was bone dry. The summer had been hotter than usual, and water sources were unreliable. I checked my bottles. I had just under 2 liters left, not enough to reach the next marked stream if that too had dried up. I told myself I could ration it, sip slowly, make it last. The trail led down into a valley thick with undergrowth. It was harder to move quickly there, with branches scratching my arms and thorny vines snagging at my pack. I lost time and the heat pressed down harder. I kept checking the map, counting miles, watching the sky slide toward evening. When I finally stumbled on the stream marked on my map, my relief turned sour. The stream was reduced to a shallow trickle of muddy water. I dropped to my knees, set my filter, and tried to pump. The intake clogged with silt almost immediately. I scraped out a small pool with my hands, waited for the water to settle, and tried again. It was slow, frustrating, but I managed to fill a bottle. The water was cloudy even after filtering, but it was all I had. That night, I felt the first sharp edge of unease. Alone in the tent, listening to the forest creak and sigh, I kept replaying the day. The thought of unreliable water worried me more than anything else. Without water, every step of the trail could turn from challenge to danger. The 6th day broke hot again. I woke with my throat dry and my legs stiff. The trail climbed again, winding higher through patches of bare rock and scraggly pine. I checked my map often. My plan was to reach another marked spring by mid-afternoon. I tried to move quickly, but the weight of the pack and the steady climb slowed me. By the time I reached the spring, my bottles were nearly empty. I felt a heavy sense of dread when I saw the cracked earth where the water should have been. My mouth was dry, my lips cracked. I sat down on a rock and stared at the map, tracing routes with my finger. The next possible source was 8 miles away, across rough terrain. I didn't have a choice. I pushed on, my pack grinding into my shoulders, my legs trembling on the rocky inclines. Sweat poured off me, and soon there was none left to pour. My head pounded with heat. Every step became mechanical. The trail blurred into a line of dust and stone. Somewhere in the late afternoon, I realized I was in trouble. My heart was hammering too fast. My hands shook. My vision fuzzed at the edges. I had been sipping carefully, but now I had nothing left. The water was gone. I told myself to stay calm. Panic would only burn energy. I forced myself to keep moving, counting steps, resting in the thin shade of boulders when I had to. The map said a creek lay ahead, just beyond a long ridge. I pushed toward it with everything I had left. When I reached the ridge, I dropped my pack and staggered forward, looking for the creek. I found only a dry bed of stones, weeds growing between them, the faint trace of water long gone. I sat down hard. My legs felt hollow. My tongue was thick in my mouth. I had never felt thirst like that before. It was sharp, overwhelming, like my whole body screamed for relief. I knew then that I had made a mistake. The smart move would have been to turn back days ago when the first sources were dry. I had pressed forward, believing I could handle it, and now I was far from the trailhead, far from safety, with no water in sight. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in my tent, staring at the nylon ceiling, my throat burning. My body twitched with restless exhaustion. I licked my lips over and over, though it did nothing. My thoughts spun. I kept picturing myself found days later, dried out, alone in the dirt. When dawn came, I packed slowly. The weight of the pack was unbearable now. My head felt stuffed with wool, but I told myself to move. I had to. The trail wound down into another valley. I watched the ground constantly, looking for any sign of water. A damp patch of soil, a green strip of vegetation, anything. Hours passed. My lips bled from dryness. My feet stumbled. My map showed another potential stream 2 miles ahead. 2 miles might as well have been 20. When I reached the stream, I heard a sound before I saw it. Faint trickle. I broke into a stumbling run. The creek was shallow but real, water slipping over stones in a thin ribbon. I fell to my knees, shoved the filter in, and drank. It was the best water I had ever tasted, even though it was warm and earthy. I drank until my stomach cramped, then filled every bottle I had. The relief was overwhelming, but it didn't erase the fear. I realized how close I had come to collapse, how narrow the line was between survival and disaster out here. I sat for a long time by the creek, staring at the trees, thinking about turning back. But stubbornness kept me moving forward. I wanted to finish what I had started. The next 2 days blurred together. I hiked from water source to water source, never letting my bottles get low again. My body felt drained, weaker than before. My legs ached constantly. My shoulders were raw from the straps. On the 9th day, as I climbed another ridge, the weather turned. Dark clouds gathered fast, rolling in from the west. The wind picked up, cold and sharp. I barely had time to pitch the tent before the rain came. It fell in sheets, drumming on the fabric, turning the trail to mud. At first I welcomed it. The rain meant water, endless water. I set out my pots and bottles to catch it. But by nightfall, the storm grew violent. Thunder cracked so close it rattled my chest. Lightning flashed in jagged bolts across the peaks. I curled in my sleeping bag, flinching at every strike, praying none of the trees around me would fall. By morning, the storm had passed, but the trail was wrecked. Small landslides had spilled across the switchbacks. Fallen branches blocked the path. Everything was soaked and slick. My boots squelched with every step. That was when I noticed something new: tracks. In the soft mud of the trail ahead, clear prints stretched out. They weren't from animals. They were boot prints, large ones, deeper than mine, heading the same direction. I hadn't seen another hiker in days. At first, the sight gave me comfort. Someone else was out here. Maybe I wasn't completely alone. But as I followed them, the comfort turned uneasy. The tracks were fresh, pressed into the mud after the storm. Whoever it was, they were close. I pushed harder, scanning ahead. The forest was dense, the trail winding. Every time I rounded a bend, I expected to see the hiker, but I never did. The prints kept appearing mile after mile. Sometimes they veered off the trail briefly, then returned. Sometimes they paused, as if the person had stood still for a while. I couldn't shake the feeling that whoever it was knew I was behind them. That night, I camped in a small clearing. I set my tent, cooked a simple meal, and tried to ignore the unease crawling under my skin. The forest was silent, too silent, as if holding its breath. I kept glancing toward the trees, expecting to see someone standing there. When I finally crawled into my sleeping bag, I left the rain fly off so I could see out through the mesh. The moon was half full, casting pale light. My eyes kept drifting open, scanning the clearing. Every shadow looked wrong. Every sound made me tense. At some point in the night, I woke with my heart pounding. I didn't know why at first. Then I realized the forest was no longer silent. I heard the faint crunch of footsteps in the distance. I always liked being outside more than anywhere else. I wasn't someone who needed company or noise to feel comfortable. I liked the silence, the smell of the dirt and trees, and the way everything felt slower when I was far from traffic or people. Hiking became something I leaned on more as I got older. It gave me time to think without distraction. It kept me moving, kept me focused, and let me feel like I was away from the clutter of normal life. That was why I had decided to take a long solo hike in late summer. The trail wasn't famous, but I had found it on an old hiking forum. It stretched deep into the mountains, cutting through pine forests and rocky slopes. It wasn't managed like the bigger, tourist-heavy trails. There were no clear maps past the first few miles, just rough guides written by hikers who had gone before. Some of the posts were years old, some newer, but they all said the same thing. It was long, quiet, and rough. That was what I wanted. I prepared more than usual. I had a heavy pack with food for several days, water filters, extra socks, and a tarp. I carried a small tent, a headlamp, and spare batteries. I had a paper map I printed from online and a compass, though the trail itself was marked in only a few parts. I wasn't careless. I knew solo hikes carried risks, but I had done things like this before, just not quite this far out. The first part was almost relaxing. The weather was warm, but clouds kept the sun from burning down on me. The trail started as a dirt road, wide enough for a truck, before narrowing into a winding footpath. Birds moved through the trees. Insects buzzed. Every so often, I heard the sound of water flowing in the distance. I kept a steady pace, stopping only for water breaks. Hours passed like that. When I finally checked the small watch strapped to my wrist, I was surprised how much time had gone by. The trail dipped down into valleys, then rose sharply into slopes that burned my legs and lungs. Sweat soaked my shirt and dripped from my chin. But I liked that kind of work. It was honest. By evening, I found a flat spot near a creek. I dropped my pack and pitched my tent. The sound of water running over rocks filled the air, calming me as I ate a meal of dried food. Darkness came slowly. The forest went quiet except for crickets and the occasional snapping branch far away. I slid into my tent and slept with the zipper pulled tight, my knife close by out of habit, though I never expected to need it. The next morning, I woke up stiff but ready. The air was cooler, with a bite that hinted at the higher elevation I had gained. I filtered water, packed up, and kept moving. The trail grew harder to follow as the day went on. The dirt path faded in places, swallowed by weeds and brush. I checked my map and compass often, moving carefully so I wouldn't drift off course. That was when I noticed the first thing that unsettled me. I came across an old fire ring. Blackened rocks sat in a circle with bits of ash inside. That wasn't unusual. People camped out here sometimes. But the ash wasn't old. It was still gray and soft, with pieces of half-burned wood mixed in. It hadn't been rained on or scattered yet. Someone had camped here not long ago. I didn't think too much about it at first. Trails always had other people, even the ones that seemed forgotten. Still, I didn't see footprints or packs hanging in trees. I scanned around for signs of gear but saw nothing. Whoever had camped here had already moved on. I kept going. The terrain shifted again. The forest thinned into rocky ground, where roots twisted out of the dirt and jagged stone jutted up like broken teeth. Climbing became slow, my boots scraping against loose rock. I had to use my hands more than once. My shoulders ached from the pack, and I could feel my skin burning on the back of my neck despite the clouds. By late afternoon, I realized I hadn't seen any new trail markers in hours. I checked my compass and map again. According to the rough guide, the path should swing left near a ridge, but the faint track I was following curved right instead. I stood there for a long moment, trying to decide if I had already missed the turn. I backtracked, scanning the ground, but the faint scuffs and pressed-down plants I had been following all pointed the same way. The dirt was disturbed just enough to show something or someone had passed this way. That was how I convinced myself I was still on the right path. As the sun dropped, I found another flat clearing. My legs throbbed from climbing all day. I pitched the tent again, lit no fire, and ate in silence. But I didn't sleep as easily this time. I kept thinking about the ash in the fire ring earlier. I had seen no one since starting this trail, yet someone else had been close not long before me. Sometime in the night, I woke up to a sound. At first, I thought it was wind, but it wasn't steady enough. It was a shuffle, something moving in the dirt outside. My chest went tight. I lay still, my hands slowly finding the knife. I held my breath, listening. The noise circled once around the tent. Not fast, not loud, but careful. Then it stopped. I stayed awake for hours, staring at the thin walls of the tent until morning came. When I finally crawled out, there was nothing to see. The dirt looked the same. Maybe I had imagined it. Maybe it had been an animal. That was the thought I forced myself to believe as I packed up and started walking again. But unease stuck with me. The trail grew worse, nearly invisible in places. I pushed through brush, checking my compass often, but the trees and slopes twisted everything around me. My sense of direction wavered. It was early afternoon when I found something that froze me. Another fire ring. This one was newer. Charred sticks still held shape, and a small pile of food wrappers sat beside them. They hadn't been touched by weather or animals yet. Someone was ahead of me. I thought about calling out, but the silence in the forest stopped me. My gut told me not to. I picked up one of the wrappers. It was a brand I didn't pack. Whoever they were, they weren't far. That night, I camped farther off the trail, deeper into the trees. I didn't want my tent to be visible. I ate quickly and slid inside, heart pounding harder than before. Again, sleep was broken. More noises outside. This time, I swore I heard steady steps. Not the uneven padding of an animal, but slow crunches in the dirt. Again, they circled. Again, they stopped. When dawn came, I forced myself out. My pack felt heavier than ever as I tightened the straps. I didn't know if I wanted to keep going forward or turn back. My map was less useful now, the lines too vague compared to what I saw in front of me. But backtracking would take days, and I wasn't even sure I could find the exact way I came. I chose forward. The ground became steep again, pulling me higher into the mountains. My throat was dry, my legs shaking. Sweat dripped into my eyes. Every time I stopped to rest, I thought I heard something behind me. A crack of a branch. A stone kicked loose. Always faint. Always gone the moment I looked. Near evening, I reached a high ridge that gave me a view of the valley below. The forest stretched out endless in every direction, dark green and unbroken. There were no roads, no rooftops, no power lines. Nothing but wilderness. The weight of isolation sank into me. That night, I didn't set up camp until the last bit of light was gone. I wanted to hide. I pitched the tent on rocky ground under low trees, barely big enough to fit. I didn't even eat, just crawled inside with the knife in my hand. The sounds came again, this time closer, slow, heavy, not circling, just stopping right outside. I stared at the thin nylon wall, every nerve screaming. My breath sounded too loud in the silence. Then, after what felt like forever, the steps moved away. When morning came, I unzipped the tent and looked around. That was when I saw them. Footprints. Not boots like mine, but bare feet. Human. They pressed into the dirt just feet from my tent, circling it once, then moving back toward the trees. I couldn't pretend anymore. Someone was following me. I packed fast, hands shaking, and left. I tried to move quicker, pushing through brush and rocks, checking behind me every few minutes. My chest stayed tight the whole day. At one point, I swore I saw something in the trees behind me, a shape, pale against the dark trunks, slipping out of view the moment I turned. My throat closed up. I kept moving, nearly running at times. By the last night, I was drained. I didn't want to stop, but I had to. My legs barely held me upright. I found a flat patch and didn't bother with the tent. I just laid the tarp out, clutching the knife, staring into the dark. Sleep came and went in shallow bursts. Every time I drifted, I thought I heard something move. Every time I woke, the silence pressed down harder. When the sky finally lightened, I forced myself up and started again. Hours later, I stumbled onto a real trail marker, a faded wooden post, half rotten but clear enough. Relief hit me so hard I nearly fell over. I followed it, and soon I had been planning this hike for months. I wanted something quiet, something far away from crowds and tourist spots, somewhere I could test myself against long miles of backcountry trail and silence. I had read about a remote route in the northern mountains, a forgotten path that only a few hikers still attempted each year. It wasn't an official trail anymore. Years back, the Forest Service had stopped maintaining it, saying storms and landslides made it too dangerous. But according to some trip reports online, it was still doable if you knew how to handle rough terrain. That challenge drew me in. I drove out early in the morning, my car loaded with food, water, a sleeping bag, and all the basics. I was 31 then, in decent shape, but I knew this trip was not going to be easy. The plan was simple. Hike in about 12 miles, find the old fire lookout marked on old maps, camp there overnight, then come back the next day. It sounded straightforward on paper, but I underestimated just how long and grueling it would feel once I was out there, miles from anything, with nothing but trees, rocks, and my own thoughts pressing against me. The first part of the trail started at a small pull-off by a gravel road. There was no signpost, no official marker, just a faint track leading into the forest. I parked the car, shouldered my heavy pack, and started walking. The air was cool, damp with morning mist. My boots pressed into soft ground, and branches brushed against my jacket. First, I felt excited, almost light. My steps were strong, and the forest around me seemed welcoming. But as the hours went on, the sense of isolation grew heavier. The trail was barely visible in places, sometimes vanishing under fallen logs or leaves. I had to keep checking my map and compass, making sure I stayed on course. Occasionally, I would spot old trail markers nailed high on trees, faded bits of red paint or metal discs nearly swallowed by bark. They reassured me I was on the right path, but they also reminded me just how forgotten this route had become. By noon, I had covered maybe 6 miles. My legs were tired already, and sweat soaked the back of my shirt. The forest felt endless, the same ridges and gullies repeating again and again. I stopped on a flat rock to eat a sandwich, listening to the deep silence. There were no voices, no hum of traffic, not even the distant drone of planes overhead. Just wind moving through pine branches and the occasional call of a bird. It was the kind of silence that pressed in on you, making every crack of a twig underfoot sound sharper. The terrain grew steeper in the afternoon. I had to scramble up loose dirt slopes, grabbing at roots for balance. My backpack seemed heavier with each step. I tried to keep my focus forward, not look too far back, because every time I glanced behind me, the dense forest looked unfamiliar, as if I could lose my way instantly. The trail twisted in strange angles, and sometimes I worried I was following deer tracks instead of the real path. It was around 4 in the afternoon when I reached a narrow ridge. The path edged along a steep drop on one side, with thick trees blocking the other. The ground here was uneven, littered with sharp rocks. My boots slipped a few times, and my heart raced as I steadied myself. Falling there would mean sliding down into a ravine full of jagged boulders. I moved slow, testing every foothold before shifting my weight. By the time I cleared that section, the sky was starting to dim. Clouds rolled in, covering the sun. I knew I needed to hurry if I wanted to reach the fire lookout before dark. But the trail seemed to stretch longer than the map suggested. My legs burned, and my water bottle was running low. I tried to ration it, taking small sips. When I finally spotted the lookout tower through the trees, I felt a wave of relief. The structure stood on a rocky rise, its wooden frame weathered but still intact. I climbed the last slope, my chest heaving. The place was old, clearly abandoned for years, but it still offered shelter. Windows were broken, the roof sagged, but it was dry inside and had enough space to roll out my sleeping bag. I set down my pack and took off my boots, my feet throbbing. The silence inside the lookout felt heavier than the forest. Dust coated the floor, and cobwebs hung in corners. I ate a quick meal of jerky and trail mix, drank the last of my water, and tried to relax. The plan was to sleep there, wake early, and head back before the weather turned worse. But as night fell, a different kind of unease crept in. Sitting alone in that dark structure, every sound outside seemed amplified. Branches snapped somewhere in the trees. Wind moaned through broken glass. I told myself it was just normal forest noise, but my body stayed tense. I kept glancing at the open doorway, half expecting to see something standing there, though I knew nothing would be. When I finally lay down, I couldn't fall asleep easily. The wooden floor was hard under my back, and the draft through the gaps in the walls made me shiver. Hours crawled by. At some point, I must have drifted off because I woke with a start to complete silence. My body felt stiff, my throat dry. I checked my watch, it was around 3 in the morning. I sat up, uneasy. Something about the air felt different. It wasn't just quiet, it was heavy, as if the whole forest was holding its breath. Then, faintly, I heard it, movement outside. Slow, deliberate crunches on the ground like footsteps. My skin prickled. I held my breath, straining to listen. The sound came closer, then stopped. I stayed frozen, my heart pounding. Minutes passed. Then the steps started again, circling the tower. It wasn't an animal. The rhythm was too measured, too heavy. Someone was out there. I didn't move, didn't make a sound. I just sat in the dark, clutching my pocket knife, knowing it was useless against anything serious. The footsteps lingered for what felt like an hour, sometimes near, sometimes fading into the trees, but always returning. Then, just before dawn, they stopped completely. When light finally crept through the broken windows, I forced myself to look outside. The ground was disturbed. There were footprints in the dirt, large, boot-shaped prints, not mine. Someone had been circling the lookout all night. I felt sick. Whoever it was, they hadn't approached directly, hadn't spoken, hadn't revealed themselves. Just walked in slow circles, waiting. I packed my gear in a rush, shouldered my bag, and started down the trail without even eating. My only thought was to get back to the car as fast as possible. The hike back was harder than the way in. My legs ached, my stomach was empty, and every sound in the forest made me flinch. I kept imagining someone following me, just out of sight. Sometimes I thought I heard branches snapping behind me, but when I turned, there was nothing. By midday, my water was gone again, and my lips were dry. I stumbled more often, tripping over roots. The trail seemed to twist differently, as if I was walking in circles. Panic set in. I forced myself to stop, take out the compass, and reorient. My hands shook as I adjusted my course. Hours dragged on. I felt weaker, hungrier, thirstier. My pack weighed a ton. My boots rubbed blisters into my heels. And still, that feeling of being watched clung to me. At one point, I spotted fresh boot prints in the mud, going the same direction as me. They weren't mine. Whoever had circled the tower was ahead, somewhere on the trail. I pushed harder, desperate to close the distance to my car before night fell. By the time the sun dipped low, I recognized the ridge I had crossed the day before. My legs wobbled, my vision blurred, but I forced myself across. Finally, as shadows lengthened, I saw the gravel road through the trees. My car sat alone where I had left it. Relief nearly dropped me to my knees. I rushed the last stretch, unlocked the door, and threw my pack inside. My throat was raw with thirst, my body trembling with exhaustion. I started the engine, the sound loud and comforting in the empty forest. As I pulled onto the gravel road, I glanced in the rearview mirror. For just a moment, I thought I saw movement at the tree line, someone standing there watching, but when I blinked, there was only shadow and branches. I didn't stop to check. I drove for hours without pause, not slowing until I reached the first small town with a gas station. Under the harsh lights of the parking lot, I finally let myself breathe. I bought 2 bottles of water and drank them so fast it hurt. My body ached, my mind reeled, but I was safe. The next day, I checked my gear. Dust from the lookout still clung to my sleeping bag. Mud from the trail covered my boots. And on the bottom of my pack, faint but clear, was a handprint in dirt. Not mine. I never went back to that trail. I never even thought about it without my stomach tightening. I had wanted solitude, silence, and adventure into forgotten land. What I found was the reminder that sometimes being truly alone out there isn't the worst thing. Sometimes I had planned the hike for weeks. I had been searching for something that wasn't crowded, something away from the usual places that fill up with tourists every weekend. I wanted to be alone with the woods, to clear my head, to get away from screens, traffic, and the constant noise of the city. I found the trail on an old map I bought at a used bookstore. It wasn't one of the popular ones. In fact, when I tried to look it up online, there was hardly anything about it. Just a short mention that it had once been a logging route decades ago, and that most people didn't bother with it anymore since newer trails had been made nearby. That only made me more interested. The morning of the hike was cool and cloudy. I left my car parked near a dirt pull-off by the side of a gravel road. The air smelled of pine, damp earth, and the faint sweetness of wildflowers hidden somewhere in the undergrowth. I tightened the straps of my pack and stepped onto the trail. The entrance wasn't marked well, just a gap between trees and a faint strip of dirt. Felt like I was stepping into something forgotten. The trail started narrow, with tall grass brushing against my legs. The ground was uneven, roots sticking up like traps waiting to trip me. I had to keep my eyes down as much as I looked ahead. Every so often, I noticed old cut stumps, reminders of when this path was used by loggers. They were gray and moss-covered now, blending into the forest as if nature was slowly erasing their scars. First, I felt peace. The woods were quiet except for the occasional bird call or the rustle of something small moving in the brush. I enjoyed the silence, the sense of being away from people. But as the trail went deeper, it grew rougher. The trees closed in, branches knotted above me, blocking out patches of sky. It felt darker, heavier. The air cooled in a way that didn't match the season. I pushed on, telling myself it was just the thickness of the forest making it feel that way. After about an hour, I realized how easy it was to lose track of time here. My watch told me I had been walking longer than it felt. I checked the map. It was vague, just a hand-drawn sketch of a line through the woods with very little detail. I figured I'd keep following the trail until I found a clearing where I could rest and eat. The trail split not long after, though the map didn't mention it. One path looked more worn, the other almost hidden by weeds. I picked the worn one, thinking it must be the real trail, but I marked the split on my phone GPS just in case. The deeper I went, the stranger things began to feel. The forest was too quiet. Usually when I hiked, I'd hear squirrels, birds, the buzzing of insects. But here, there were long stretches of silence where nothing moved. No sound at all except my own boots hitting the ground. The stillness felt unnatural, like the whole forest was holding its breath. I kept walking, but unease grew in me. I glanced over my shoulder more than once, sure I had heard faint crunching behind me. Every time, the trail was empty. My pack straps creaked with each step, and I told myself that was probably what I was hearing. Hours passed. The trail started to fade. What had once been clear dirt turned patchy, blending with the forest floor. Fallen branches forced me to step over or push through, and some spots looked like no one had walked there in years. I kept looking at my GPS, but the signal dropped often. The line of the trail on the map was useless compared to the mess of reality around me. By late afternoon, the light was changing. It filtered through the trees in long golden shafts, but it also meant I didn't have as much time as I thought. I wanted to turn back, but I hated the thought of retracing hours of walking. I convinced myself I'd find an open spot ahead, maybe even a connection to another trail. That was when I found the clearing. At first I thought it was what I had been hoping for, a break in the woods where I could rest. But as I stepped into it, the air shifted. The grass was flattened in strange patches, as though something heavy had lain there. I noticed bits of trash, but not the usual candy wrappers or water bottles hikers leave. These were older things: rusted tin cans, pieces of cloth faded almost white, broken glass jars half buried in dirt. I crouched to look closer. The fabric looked like part of an old shirt sleeve. The glass had thick green edges like the kind people used decades ago. Everything looked abandoned a long time ago, yet the ground around it felt disturbed, as though someone had been here recently. I didn't like the feeling, so I ate quickly and kept moving. The trail beyond the clearing grew worse. In places it was gone completely, forcing me to weave between trees, trying to pick up where it might continue. I knew I was taking a risk pushing further, but the idea of going back through miles of forest already behind me felt just as bad. Not long after, I began to notice signs that I wasn't the only one using this path. The dirt had faint indentations, footprints, though not fresh. They were uneven, some pressed deep, some barely there, but they were human. I bent down and studied them. They weren't boot prints like mine. They looked like old shoes, thin-soled, almost slipper-like. I felt a cold prickle on my skin. Who else would be out here wearing something like that? I kept going, more alert now, glancing at the trees often. The forest pressed close. The shadows stretched longer. I told myself I'd stop soon, set up camp, and head back in the morning. But the deeper I went, the more uneasy I felt, as though eyes were on me from somewhere hidden. Then I smelled smoke. It was faint, drifting on the air, carrying that burnt wood scent. My heart beat faster. Smoke meant people. People meant maybe I wasn't alone. For a moment I felt relief, but then I remembered the footprints, the strange clearing, the way this trail seemed forgotten. Whoever was out here wasn't camping at a popular spot. I followed the smell cautiously, moving slow, watching the ground. After a while, I saw it through the trees, a thin line of gray rising into the sky. I stopped, crouching low. I didn't want to walk straight into whoever was making that fire. I edged closer until I could see. It wasn't a campsite like I expected. It was another clearing, smaller than the first. In the middle was a ring of stones with a fire still smoldering, though it looked like it had burned down hours ago. Around it were more strange things. Bones scattered in the grass, long and pale. At first I thought they were animal, but some looked not. There were metal pots blackened from heat, a pile of clothing stacked oddly in a corner, and ropes coiled neatly like they were waiting to be used. My stomach tightened. I didn't step into the clearing. I just stood there in the trees, watching, listening. No one was there now, but someone had been. Recently, the sun was dipping low, the forest dimming into shadow. I knew I had to make a choice. Stay near here and risk whoever made this camp returning, or push on and hope I found a safer place. My nerves were raw. I chose to keep moving, quickening my pace even though the trail was rough. The woods grew darker fast. Every sound made me jump. A branch snapping in the distance, the flutter of a bird, the crunch of leaves that sometimes seemed to match my steps too closely. I kept checking over my shoulder, certain I'd see someone following. But each time, nothing. By the time night truly fell, I was exhausted. My legs ached, my throat was dry, and I hadn't found anywhere that felt safe. I forced myself to stop in a dense patch of trees and set up my small tent. My hands shook as I worked, listening to every rustle around me. I ate a little food but couldn't stomach much. The thought of sleeping out there, knowing someone might be nearby, twisted my insides. I lay awake for hours, every snap of a twig making me hold my breath. At some point, exhaustion won and I drifted off. I woke in the dark to a sound outside my tent. Slow, steady steps crushing leaves softly. My chest tightened. I didn't move. The steps circled, paused, then faded. I stayed frozen, barely breathing, until silence returned. I didn't sleep again that night. When morning finally came, I packed fast and started back the way I thought I had come. The forest looked different in daylight, but that didn't make me feel better. I checked my GPS often, but the signal kept failing. I tried to retrace my route, but the trail twisted, faded, reappeared in places I didn't expect. Doubt crept in. Hours passed, and I realized with sinking dread that I was lost. Completely lost. I couldn't even find the split I had marked the day before. The woods stretched endless in every direction. Panic sat heavy in my chest. I forced myself to stay calm, to keep moving. I rationed my water, ate sparingly, and marked trees with small cuts so I wouldn't go in circles. But every turn felt the same: trees, rocks, tangled roots. On the second night, I didn't set up the tent. I was too scared to be confined. I sat against a tree, clutching my knife, listening. Again, footsteps came in the dark. This time they were closer, slower, deliberate. I held my breath, heart pounding so hard I had planned this hike for months. It was supposed to be simple, a weekend escape from the city, a chance to breathe fresh air and test myself on a trail I had never attempted before. I wasn't a seasoned hiker by any means, but I knew enough to be careful, and I had done long walks and smaller hikes before. My plan was to hike alone, to have my thoughts, my solitude, my own pace. It was early September, and the weather had been mild, perfect for the sort of forest hike I wanted. Cool mornings, warm afternoons, dry leaves, crisp air, and the quiet that comes when humans leave a place alone. I started early, driving the 2 hours to the trailhead while the sun was still low, just beginning to burn off the mist that hung over the hills. The parking lot was nearly empty. A few cars were there, early risers like me, but mostly it was quiet. I double-checked my pack: water, food, first aid kit, map, compass, extra layers. I tightened my boots, took a deep breath, and stepped onto the trail. The first few miles were easy. The path was well-worn, soft with fallen leaves, lined with trees that formed a kind of tunnel over my head. Sunlight filtered through in sharp beams, catching on the edges of leaves that had started to turn. Felt calm. I passed a small stream, its water clear and cold, and stopped to fill my water bottle and take a sip. I could hear the distant call of birds and the occasional rustle of small animals in the underbrush. Everything seemed normal. By the third mile, the trail began to climb. The incline was steady, not too steep, but enough that I had to pause every so often to catch my breath. I stopped at a rock outcropping to rest, looking down over the valley below. Mist hung in the low areas, making the trees look like they were floating. I ate a small snack, checked my map, and continued upward. The higher I climbed, the thinner the trail became. It narrowed to a single path barely wide enough for one person, and roots jutted out of the ground, ready to trip the careless. I stayed alert, watching each step carefully. Around the 5th mile, I noticed a strange silence. The birds had stopped. The rustling of small animals vanished. It was unnerving, but I told myself it was normal. Maybe the animals were hiding because the air had cooled and the sun was blocked by the dense canopy. I shrugged it off and kept moving. By the 6th mile, I realized I had gone further than I had planned for the morning. My legs were tired, but my spirits were high. The trail curved sharply, and I entered a section of the forest I hadn't seen on the map as being so thick. Trees pressed in on both sides. The underbrush was dense. I had to push branches aside to get through, my hands scratching and catching on thorns. I noticed that the trail markers were becoming sparse, faded, or even missing in some sections. This unsettled me slightly, but I told myself I had a map and compass, and I knew roughly the direction I needed to go. By midday, the sun had climbed high, but its light barely penetrated the forest. The air was heavy and still. I drank some water and tried to focus on the sound of my own footsteps. Then I heard it, a faint, irregular snapping of twigs. I froze. I told myself it was probably a deer, maybe a squirrel, maybe just the wind knocking branches together. But it was too deliberate, too regular to be random. I turned slowly, scanning the trees, but I saw nothing, just shadows and leaves moving slightly in the breeze. My stomach tightened, a familiar tension rising in my chest. I had hiked alone before, but I had never felt quite this watched. I kept moving faster now, but careful not to trip. The snapping continued intermittently, always ahead, never quite close enough to see clearly. The trail twisted and turned, and after another half hour, I came to a small clearing. I stopped to catch my breath and looked around. The clearing was sunlit, and I could see for some distance. I breathed a little easier. Maybe the snapping had been nothing. I ate another small snack and refilled my water. My legs ached, but it wasn't unusual. I started walking again, moving past the clearing and deeper into the denser part of the forest. It wasn't long before I realized that the trail markings were gone completely. My map indicated a path, but it didn't match what I was seeing. There were only trees, thick and unbroken, with the faint traces of what might have been a trail, now covered by leaves and underbrush. I stopped and tried to retrace my steps, but every direction looked the same. The forest felt like a cage, tall trees rising on all sides, their branches interwoven into a dense ceiling. Panic started to creep in. I had been careful, I had packed well, and I had told someone where I was going. But the map and compass felt useless in the tangle of forest. I tried to calm myself. I knew that panicking would make me make mistakes, and mistakes in this environment could be dangerous. I forced myself to slow my breathing and think. I decided to backtrack to find the last marker I had seen. Each step was cautious, testing the ground for roots and loose soil. The forest seemed to close in as I moved. The sun was beginning to lower, and the shadows stretched long and dark across the uneven ground. The snapping of twigs returned, but now it was closer. My heart thumped. I kept moving, faster now, scanning the trees. There was nothing visible, just the faint echo of footsteps behind me. I tried to tell myself it was an animal, but the sound seemed too deliberate, following me in rhythm with my own steps. By late afternoon, I realized I was lost. I had wandered off the trail completely. I had a general idea of which direction the parking lot should be, but the forest was unfamiliar, dense, and confusing. Every turn looked the same. My legs were tired, my feet sore, and I realized I had been hiking for nearly 7 hours. My water was running low, and I hadn't eaten much since morning. I tried calling for help, but there was no signal. My phone said no service. My heart sank. I had planned for emergencies, but I had never imagined actually needing rescue in the middle of this dense, unmarked forest. I forced myself to sit down, take a few deep breaths, and assess my supplies. Water, food, map, compass, and a flashlight. I decided I had to keep moving. Night was approaching, and I knew that staying put would make me even more vulnerable. I chose a direction that I believed led downhill, hoping it would eventually bring me back to a road or trail. The forest floor was uneven, littered with fallen branches and loose rocks. Every step required focus. By late afternoon, the shadows had grown long, the sunlight barely visible through the thick canopy. The temperature dropped rapidly, and I shivered despite my layers. Night came faster than I expected. The forest became a world of shadows, shapes twisting in the dim light. I turned on my flashlight, but its beam barely cut through the darkness. Every sound was amplified. The rustle of leaves, the snap of a twig, the distant call of an owl. My mind imagined threats everywhere, but I reminded myself repeatedly that there were no people, no ghosts, no monsters, just the forest, and I had to get out. The trail I tried to follow downhill disappeared completely into thick underbrush. I moved slowly, using my hands to push branches aside, feeling the damp soil with each step. I slipped several times, catching myself just in time, but the constant fear of injury made my progress slow and exhausting. My flashlight flickered as the batteries weakened. I had enough for a few more hours, maybe, but I couldn't afford to waste it. I remembered the basics. Stay calm, focus on landmarks, avoid unnecessary risks. I tried to mark my path, breaking small branches and leaving scratches on tree trunks so I could backtrack if necessary. Hours passed. My food was gone, my water was half empty. I was exhausted, hungry, and my muscles ached. Still, I kept moving. The snapping of twigs returned intermittently, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was moving in the forest. I told myself it was probably an animal, but the feeling of being watched was constant. Then I stumbled onto a small stream. I hadn't seen water since morning. I knelt and drank carefully, feeling the cool liquid revive me slightly. Following the stream seemed like a logical choice. It might lead to a larger river or trail eventually. I walked alongside it, careful not to slip on the wet rocks. The forest grew darker and the night colder. My flashlight finally gave out, leaving me with only the dim light of the moon. I had to rely on my other senses. Listening, feeling the terrain, moving slowly to avoid falling. Hours passed. My legs ached so much that I could barely lift my feet. Hunger gnawed at me. My hands were scratched and bruised from pushing through the underbrush. I realized I might have been walking in circles. Panic tried to take hold again, but I forced myself to breathe, to take each step deliberately, to keep moving forward. I told myself that staying calm was the only way to survive. Then I heard it, a faint but distinct sound of I never thought a simple hike would turn into one of the scariest experiences of my life. I've spent years walking trails, camping, and being outdoors. I know how to prepare, how to stay safe, and how to respect nature. But this time, all that knowledge only carried me so far. The rest was just raw fear, survival instinct, and sheer luck. It started with me wanting to try a trail I had read about in a small online forum. It wasn't one of the popular hikes. It wasn't marked on most maps. That's what made it interesting to me. People said it had old logging roads, deer tracks, and abandoned hunting camps that no one touched anymore. Most people avoided it because it was overgrown and confusing, but for me that sounded like a challenge. I always liked going off the beaten path, exploring places where few people went. I wanted quiet and I wanted to test myself a little. The weather was clear when I left. It was late summer, one of those days when the air feels heavy but not unbearable. I packed what I always pack: a map, compass, extra food, water, headlamp, and my small tent. I had my phone, but I didn't expect much signal out there. I wore my usual boots, ones already broken in, and I carried my trekking poles. I felt ready. The trail began like any other. The first mile or so followed a rough dirt road, wide enough for a truck but clearly not used in years. Grass pushed up through the middle, and small trees grew along the edges. The deeper I went, the less it looked like a road. After a while, I passed an old rusted-out car frame half buried in weeds. That told me the stories were true. This had once been a place people used but had long since forgotten. I walked for hours. The ground slowly changed from road to faint path, and then sometimes to nothing at all. I would lose the track and find it again, using broken branches and old boot prints in mud as clues. It was slow going, but I liked the focus it took. I felt alone in the woods, far away from anyone, which was exactly what I wanted. But then things started to feel different. The first thing I noticed was how quiet it got. Usually on hikes I hear birds, bugs, wind in the trees. Here, after a while, it was mostly silence. Just the sound of my own boots on the dirt. Every once in a while, I would hear a crow far off or the crack of a branch, but then it would fade again into stillness. By the time the sun was dropping lower, I realized I hadn't seen any trail markers for hours, not even old ones. I had been following what I thought was the right way, but I couldn't be sure anymore. My map didn't really help since this wasn't an official trail. I checked my compass. I knew roughly which direction led back toward the main road, but I wanted to push just a little farther, thinking maybe I would find a clearing or one of those old camps. That's when I saw something strange. It was a rope tied high between two trees. It sagged, weathered, and frayed, almost hidden by leaves. Hanging from it were rusted tin cans that clinked lightly together in the breeze. It didn't look recent. It looked like something someone had put there years ago and left behind. I stood staring at it for a long time. It wasn't dangerous in itself, but it felt wrong, like a warning or maybe part of some makeshift alarm. I should have turned back there, but I didn't. Instead, I kept going, telling myself it was just old hunters marking a path or kids messing around. The woods got thicker. The ground rose into uneven ridges. I was sweating hard, trying to keep my balance while climbing over fallen logs. Then, as I pushed through a patch of dense brush, I stepped out into a small clearing. And that's when the smell hit me. It was the sour, heavy stink of rot. Not just a dead animal, bigger, more spread out. I looked around, covering my nose with my sleeve. In the middle of the clearing was a pile of bones and hides. Deer, maybe. At least 3 of them, torn apart, their skeletons stacked roughly together. The hides were half buried under leaves, stiff with age. Flies buzzed lazily over them, even though most of the meat was long gone. I felt my stomach tighten. It wasn't just that animals had died here. It was that someone had put them all in one place. It didn't look natural. It looked like something had dragged them here, or someone had made a pile on purpose. I backed away slowly, my heartbeat picking up. I told myself it was probably hunters again. People skinning deer and leaving the remains. That made sense. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was standing somewhere I shouldn't be. I turned to leave, but that's when I noticed footprints in the soft dirt near the edge of the clearing. They weren't fresh, but they were human, barefoot. The hair rose on my arms. I decided then I had gone far enough. I pulled out my compass and started moving back the way I thought I had come. The problem was, the woods didn't look the same anymore. The trail I thought I followed was gone. Every direction looked identical: thick brush, tall trees, scattered logs. I told myself to stay calm. I still had daylight, and I knew the rough direction of the road. If I kept steady, I'd make it out before dark. I just had to keep moving. But the woods felt different now. Every little sound made me snap my head around. A squirrel darting across the leaves sounded like heavy steps. Branches creaking in the wind sounded like someone shifting just out of sight. I tried to focus on walking, on staying straight, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone anymore. By the time the sun dipped low, I still hadn't found the road. I knew I needed to set up camp before it got too dark. I picked a spot against a ridge, cleared away sticks, and pitched my tent quickly. I ate some food, drank water, and tried to steady myself. When night came, the woods grew darker than I expected. My little headlamp lit only a circle. Beyond that was black, and that's when the noises started. At first, it was small things: a snap of a twig, rustling leaves, normal wood sounds. But then I heard something heavier, moving slowly through brush, pausing, then moving again. Too heavy for a raccoon, too careful for a deer. I sat frozen inside my tent, listening. My heart hammered so hard I could hear it in my ears. The footsteps circled wide, then grew faint, then returned again. It was like something was pacing, keeping just far enough away that I couldn't see it with my light. I barely slept that night. Every time I drifted off, I woke to another noise. Sometimes I thought I heard breathing just beyond the fabric of my tent. Sometimes I thought I saw the faint flicker of movement when I peeked out with my light. But I never saw anyone, never heard a voice. Just movement, slow and steady, until finally the night dragged into morning. When light came, I packed up fast. I didn't even finish breakfast. I just wanted out. I picked a direction and started moving as fast as I could. I pushed through brush, slid down gullies, scrambled up ridges. My legs ached. My throat burned with thirst. Hours passed, and still I couldn't find the road. My map meant nothing anymore. Then I found something that made my blood run cold. It was another rope between 2 trees, more cans hanging from it, but this one was newer, less rust. Some of the cans still had faded labels on them, and under it, pressed into the dirt, were fresh barefoot prints. I can't even describe the fear that hit me then. It wasn't just being lost anymore. It was knowing someone else was out there, someone who didn't want to be found, someone who might have been circling me in the night. I forced myself to keep moving, following the compass, pushing west. I didn't stop except to drink. My hands shook every time I thought I heard something behind me. It took until almost evening, but finally I heard something I hadn't heard in 2 days. The distant hum of a car. I stumbled forward, crashing through brush, until I broke out onto a narrow paved road. Relief hit me so hard I nearly dropped to my knees. I followed the road until I saw a small pull-off with a single parked car. From there, I recognized where I was. I knew the highway wasn't far. When I finally reached my own car, my clothes were torn, my skin scratched, and my face hollow with exhaustion. I drove home without looking back, hands gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles ached. It's been months now, and I still think about it. I think about the piles of bones, the ropes strung through the trees, the barefoot prints, and most of all, the slow footsteps outside my tent at night. I'll never go back there. Some trails are forgotten for a reason. I had been planning a long solo hike for weeks. It wasn't anything extreme, just a few days in the mountains, carrying everything I needed on my back. I had been on many shorter hikes before, some overnight trips too, but this one was different. This time, I wanted to test myself, go deeper into the wilderness, and see how I would manage. I studied the maps, packed my gear, checked the weather over and over, and tried to prepare for everything. The idea of being out there alone both excited me and made me uneasy. The trail I picked was not one of the popular ones. I wanted quiet, space to think, and the feeling of being cut off from everything for a while. The first day went smooth. I parked my car at the small trailhead, locked it, slung my backpack on, and started up. The weather was clear, though hot. I kept a steady pace, drinking from my water bottle often, sweating through my shirt. The sound of the forest around me felt good. Birds called, insects buzzed, and the crunch of my boots against the dirt and rocks set a rhythm. The pack was heavy at first, but I had packed light compared to some people I had seen before. Tent, sleeping bag, food, water filter, extra clothes, knife, headlamp, first aid kit, and a few other small things. Still weighed me down, though. I kept reminding myself it was only heavy on the first day. Every meal I ate would make it a little lighter. By mid-afternoon, I had covered about 10 miles. My legs burned, and my shoulders ached from the straps. I found a flat clearing near a stream and decided it was a good place to stop. I pitched my tent, filtered water, cooked a freeze-dried meal, and sat on a fallen log as the light faded. The quiet settled in heavier at night. No traffic, no voices, no distant hum of towns. Just the dark forest and the sound of the stream trickling. That first night passed without trouble, though I woke up several times. Every noise out there felt louder in the dark. A twig snapping, leaves moving, an owl calling. I told myself it was just normal forest life and forced myself back to sleep. The next day, I woke early, packed up, and kept going. The trail climbed higher into the hills, switchback after switchback. My shirt stuck to my back, sweat dripping down my face. My boots rubbed at my heels. The pack dug into my hips, but I felt strong, in control. I took breaks often, leaning my pack against a tree and drinking. Around noon, I stopped on a ridge with a wide view of the valley below. The air felt thinner, cooler. I could see miles of forest stretching out, rolling ridges fading into the horizon. It made me feel small, but also alive. I ate a quick snack and pressed on. That afternoon, clouds started building. By evening, I could hear thunder far away. I found another campsite near some large boulders and quickly set up before the rain came. I staked the tent down hard, made sure the rainfly was tight, and got inside just as the storm broke. Rain hammered the nylon. Wind pushed against the sides. Lightning flashed. Thunder rolled. I lay in my sleeping bag, staring at the ceiling of the tent, feeling every crash in my chest. I thought about how alone I was out there, how no one would know if something happened. It was a hard thought to shake. The storm passed late into the night, leaving the forest dripping and heavy with the smell of wet pine. I drifted off, but not before checking that my gear was dry and secure. On the third day, I woke sore and stiff. My right ankle ached a little from all the climbing, but I shook it off. I boiled water for coffee, packed up, and pushed forward. The trail narrowed as it wound through thicker woods. The undergrowth was denser, and fallen logs forced me to climb or go around. At one point, I slipped on wet rock and banged my knee hard, but I kept moving. It was mid-afternoon when things started to change. I noticed the trail markers were harder to spot. The last blaze I saw on a tree had been a while back. I slowed down, looking carefully, but the path seemed faint. I checked my map, tried to match the bends of the ridge and the streams, but it wasn't clear. I pulled out my compass and tried to reorient. I thought I was fine. I kept going. But after another hour, I realized I hadn't seen a marker in too long. The path under my boots was less worn. My stomach tightened. I turned back, thinking I would just retrace, but after walking for 20 minutes, nothing looked familiar. My chest felt tight now. I was trying not to panic. I pulled out the map again, but the dense trees above blocked a lot of the view, and I couldn't see far enough to match landmarks. I told myself to calm down. I had a compass, food, water, everything I needed. I wasn't going to die just because I lost the trail. I kept walking, looking for signs of a path. The forest pressed in, quiet except for my own breathing and the crunch of my boots. By evening, I knew I was lost. Completely. I had no idea where the official trail was anymore. The sun was dropping, the light fading. I forced myself to set up camp in a small clearing and ate a little food, but I could barely taste it. My mind kept racing, thinking about how stupid I had been, how careless. I lay in my bag, listening to the forest, my heart thumping. Every sound made me sit up and look. That night was worse. I heard movement out there, heavier than a small animal. Branches breaking, leaves rustling. I sat still, clutching my knife, barely breathing. My ears strained, trying to track the sound. It moved, then stopped, then moved again. It didn't sound like a bear. Too light, not like a deer either. The steps seemed slower, deliberate. My throat was dry. I waited, frozen. After a long while, the sound faded. I didn't sleep much. Every time I drifted, I snapped awake again. My body was tense all over. In the morning, my hands shook as I packed up. I tried to pick a direction using my compass, heading east, figuring I would eventually hit a road or another trail. I pushed through thick brush, scraped by branches, sweat dripping into my eyes. The forest felt endless. Hours passed. My legs grew heavier. My ankle hurt worse, swelling now. I stopped often, leaning against trees, trying to catch my breath. I filtered more water from a muddy stream, the taste earthy and metallic. I forced myself to eat some trail mix, though I wasn't hungry. At one point, I thought I heard voices. I stopped, heart racing, listening. It was faint, almost like laughter far away. I moved toward it quickly, crashing through the undergrowth, but after a while, it faded into nothing. Maybe it had been the wind, maybe just my imagination. By evening, I was exhausted. My clothes were damp with sweat, my face streaked with dirt. I found a small hollow between rocks and set up my tent. As I sat there, I noticed more broken branches nearby, like something had come through recently. The hairs on my neck stood up. That night, the noises came back. Slow steps in the dark. Closer this time. I held my breath, knife in hand, straining to see through the tent walls. The steps stopped just outside. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding. Then silence. I stayed frozen for what felt like forever, until eventually, my eyes grew heavy and I drifted off from sheer exhaustion. The next morning, I unzipped the tent and found tracks in the soft dirt. Not boots, not hooves, bare feet, human, medium-sized, maybe male. My stomach dropped. I wasn't alone out there. Someone had been circling my tent. Fear crawled over me, thick and heavy. I packed quickly, barely eating. I kept glancing over my shoulder as I walked, every sound making me twitch. My ankle was worse, every step a stab of pain. I limped more than I walked. By midday, I found an old fire ring near a clearing. It looked weathered, not used recently, but it made me feel slightly better. Proof that someone else had been out here. But then I saw more of those bare footprints nearby, pressed into the mud. My throat tightened again. Whoever it was, they had been here too. I pushed harder, trying to get away. My lungs burned, my pack felt twice as heavy. Branches whipped at my arms, bugs bit at my neck. The fear kept me going even as my ankle screamed. That night, I didn't set up the tent. I just laid the sleeping bag under thick brush, trying to stay hidden. I didn't light a fire, didn't cook. I ate a dry energy bar, barely chewing. I lay there in the dark, knife clutched, eyes wide. Sometime in the night, I heard it again. Steps, closer, branches moving. My heart pounded so hard it hurt. I stayed perfectly still, barely breathing. Something stopped only feet away. I could hear the faint sound of someone's breath. Human breath, shallow, steady. I lay frozen, terror locking me down. After minutes, or maybe an hour, I didn't know, the sound moved away again. I stayed awake until dawn, shaking all over. When the light came, I stumbled up and forced myself forward. My legs felt like lead, my head light. I had been hiking for years, but every time I went out, I realized how easy it was to forget how dangerous the wilderness could be when you got too comfortable. I liked pushing myself, taking trails that weren't well traveled, and testing how far I could go alone. This trip was supposed to be a simple 3-day loop through a section of forest I hadn't tried before. It was in late summer, just as the air was beginning to cool, but before the days started shortening too much. I had my backpack, food, extra clothes, map, compass, and enough water bottles to carry me through until I could refill at streams. Everything was planned. At least that's what I thought. The trail I picked wasn't one of the main ones. It was marked on the park map, but it had a reputation for being less maintained. That was part of the reason I chose it. I wanted quiet, solitude, and the kind of silence you can only get far from roads and crowds. My plan was to hike in about 12 miles the first day, camp near a stream, then loop back around and out. The ranger station was already closed by the time I got to the parking lot, so I signed in at the logbook on the porch, wrote my intended route, and noted the expected return day. The first several miles were smooth, and the trail looked better than I expected. The dirt path was narrow, pressed down by weather and the occasional hiker, but it was clear enough. Trees arched over me, their branches holding on to the last deep green of summer. The air smelled earthy and damp, mixed with pine and moss. I made good time, enjoying the sound of my boots against the soil and the occasional bird calls echoing in the canopy above. By mid-afternoon, I was sweating hard and my legs felt heavy from the climb, but I still had energy. The sun cut through the gaps in the trees in wide, golden beams, the kind that made everything look softer than it really was. I noticed fewer signs of people the deeper I went. No candy wrappers, no boot prints, not even broken branches that usually marked where someone had cut through. I liked that. It meant I had the trail to myself. Around the 10th mile, things started to change. The trail thinned out, sometimes vanishing into the underbrush before reappearing a few feet later. I had to stop and check the map more often, making sure I hadn't missed a turn. The ground grew rockier. Roots snaked across the path like traps waiting to catch my boots, and the slope tilted upward more than I expected. I slowed down but kept pushing. I wanted to reach the stream before dark. When I finally heard the trickle of running water, it was a relief. My shoulders ached from the weight of the pack, and I was thirsty despite rationing sips of water. The stream wasn't big, just a narrow ribbon of clear water cutting through mossy rocks, but it was enough. I dropped my pack, stretched my back, and crouched by the edge to fill my bottles through the filter. The cold water washed the dust from my throat, and for a moment, everything felt perfect. I set up camp on a flat patch nearby where the trees opened just enough for a bit of sky to show. That night, the forest was alive with small sounds. Crickets, the rustle of leaves, the occasional snap of a branch in the dark. None of it worried me. I'd slept alone in the woods enough times to know the difference between an animal moving through the brush and something worth fearing. I lay in my tent, warm inside the sleeping bag, watching the faint glow of moonlight filter through the fabric until my eyes closed. The second day was when things shifted. I woke up at dawn, stiff but rested, and packed quickly. My plan was to cut across the loop and head back toward the main trail system. According to the map, the connecting trail wasn't far from where I camped. It should have been easy to find, but after hiking in the direction it should have been for more than an hour, I realized I wasn't seeing any markers. I pulled out the map, double-checked the compass, and tried again. Still nothing. That was when a low unease started creeping in. It wasn't full panic, just the first prickle of doubt that maybe I'd made a mistake. I backtracked, scanned tree trunks for blazes, searched the ground for signs of a trail. The forest around me looked the same in every direction. I finally found what looked like a faint path heading uphill and decided it had to be it. The climb was steeper than I expected, and by the time I reached the top, I realized it wasn't a trail at all. It was just a washed-out gully, carved by rain over the years. The ground was loose under my boots, and I had to steady myself on branches to avoid slipping. When I reached the top, the forest stretched out in every direction, unbroken and endless. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. Losing a trail wasn't new for me, but usually, it only took a short time to find my way back. This was different. The map didn't match what I was seeing, and the compass felt almost useless when everything looked the same. I told myself to stay calm and picked a direction where I thought the trail should be. For the next several hours, I walked. The sun climbed higher, and the air grew hotter, pressing down on me. Sweat ran into my eyes, stinging as I blinked it away. My legs grew sore, and the straps of my pack dug into my shoulders until they felt bruised. I tried not to think about how fast my water supply was draining. I crossed 2 dry stream beds, nothing but rocks and leaves. My map showed streams in the area, but I couldn't tell if these were the same ones or different. By late afternoon, exhaustion hit me harder. I dropped the pack and sat on a rock, breathing heavy, feeling the weight of being lost pressed deeper into my chest. I ate a protein bar, but it barely touched the hunger gnawing at me. I knew I had enough food for 2 more days if I rationed carefully, but only if I stuck to the plan. And the plan was already ruined. I decided to set camp before dark, even though I hadn't gotten far. I found a flat spot under a cluster of trees and pitched the tent. As the night came down, the silence felt heavier. I lay awake longer than usual, listening to every crack and shuffle in the brush, nerves stretched tight. The 3rd day was worse. When I set out in the morning, I tried to use the sun's position to guide me west, where I knew the main trails had to be. My legs ached from the day before, and I stumbled more often, catching my boots on roots, sliding on loose dirt. I felt the skin on my heels rub raw inside my socks, blisters forming. My throat was dry, and I rationed sips of warm water, trying not to think about how little I had left. Around midday, I heard running water again. Relief flooded me, and I hurried toward the sound, stumbling down a slope until I reached another stream. This one was bigger than the one near my first camp, the water running clear and cold over smooth stones. I filled every bottle I had, drinking deeply until my stomach cramped. Then I splashed water on my face, trying to wake myself up from the fog of exhaustion pressing in. I followed the stream for hours, hoping it would lead me to a larger waterway or even a crossing with a trail. But the banks grew steeper, the rocks slick, and progress slowed until it felt like I was barely moving at all. By evening, I was forced to set camp again, frustrated and drained. That night was the hardest yet. My body felt broken, every muscle aching, but it was my mind that suffered more. I thought about the logbook at the ranger station, about how I had written my return date. I tried to calculate how many days it would be before anyone even noticed I was late, and then how many days after that before someone might start searching this far out. The math didn't look good. On the 4th day, hunger grew sharper. I chewed slowly through another protein bar, saving the rest, but I could feel how weak I was becoming. My pack felt heavier each hour, and I had to stop more often to rest. I followed the stream again, pushing forward with stubborn determination, but the forest never changed. Trees, rocks, silence. No signs of people. Late in the afternoon, I spotted something out of place. A torn piece of fabric caught on a branch. I stumbled closer, hope rising, but when I picked it up, it was nothing more than a scrap of weathered tarp, probably blown there by wind years ago. Felt like a cruel joke. That night, I barely slept. Every sound outside my tent sounded closer, sharper, like something circling me. I gripped the small knife I carried, though I knew it would do little if anything bigger than a raccoon came too close. My stomach twisted with emptiness, and my head throbbed with dehydration despite the water I drank. On the 5th day, I woke up weaker than ever. My legs shook under me. My hands trembled when I tried to tie the straps of the pack. I knew I couldn't keep wandering blindly. I had to make a choice. Stay put and wait, or keep moving and risk getting even further. I chose to move. Hours blurred together. My body felt like it was shutting down, but some stubborn part of me forced one foot in front of the other. Then, in the late afternoon, I saw it, faint but real this time. A trail marker, a small square nailed to a tree, weathered but still visible. My chest tightened, and my eyes stung with sudden tears. I followed it, desperate, until more markers appeared, leading me down a narrow, overgrown path. It took another 2 hours, but eventually, the sound of distant traffic reached me. I have always loved hiking. For years, it was my escape from the noise of life. The woods, the mountains, the long trails that stretched further than the eye could see. They gave me peace. I liked going alone because being alone in the wild felt cleaner, simpler. No schedules, no chatter, no one asking questions. Just me, my backpack, and the trail. Last summer, I decided to take on a hike that I had been putting off for a while. It was a remote trail in the northern part of the state, a section of land that most people avoided because it was too quiet, too far from towns, and not easy to get to. That was what drew me in. I wanted to test myself, to see how it felt to go days without seeing anyone, to be completely cut off. The plan was simple. I packed food for 4 days, a tent, sleeping bag, water filter, and all the usual gear. I studied the map for weeks, tracing the route over and over until I could picture it in my head. It was about 30 miles of trail that looped through dense forest, along ridges, across streams, and back to the starting point. On paper, it looked like a good challenge, but not impossible. I started the hike early one morning. The air was cool, the sun not yet too strong, and the forest alive with birds. First, everything went as planned. The trail was narrow but well-marked, cutting through tall trees with patches of sunlight dropping onto the ground. I felt good, strong, moving quickly with a steady pace. I remember thinking that this was exactly why I came out here. The quiet, the fresh air, the feeling of being small under the trees. The first day went smoothly. I walked until late afternoon, set up my tent near a stream, cooked a simple meal on my stove, and fell asleep to the sound of running water. Nothing unusual. I woke up rested and ready for day 2. Day 2 started the same way, calm and steady. The trail grew steeper as I climbed toward the ridge. My pack dug into my shoulders, sweat dripped down my back, and my legs burned, but that was part of the hike. By noon, I reached a high point where I could see the endless green of the forest stretching for miles. It was beautiful but also a little unsettling, because I couldn't see any signs of people. No roads, no smoke, nothing but trees. I stood there longer than I meant to, staring out and realizing how alone I really was. When I dropped down from the ridge, the trail became rougher. Rocks, roots, and thick undergrowth slowed me down. That's when I noticed the first thing that bothered me. The trail markers grew faint. Some were old paint on trees, others small wooden posts, but several were missing or too faded to see. I had to check the map more often, trying to match bends and turns to what I saw around me. It was fine at first. I figured the trail just wasn't maintained as well as I expected. But then, later in the afternoon, I lost the trail completely. I came to an open patch where trees had fallen, and the ground was torn with branches. I searched for the next marker, circling around, but couldn't find it. My stomach dropped when I realized I wasn't sure which direction I had come from anymore. I forced myself to stay calm. I pulled out the map and compass, trying to line them up with the sun. I picked the direction I thought was right and pushed forward. After about 20 minutes, I found the trail again, the sight of a faded blaze on a tree almost making me laugh in relief. But that mistake cost me time. The sun dipped lower, and I had to hurry to find a place to camp. That night, I set up in a dense stand of trees. The ground was uneven, the air colder, and the forest louder. Branches creaked, leaves rustled, and once or twice I heard something moving nearby. Probably deer, I told myself. I ate quickly, zipped myself into the tent, and tried to ignore the feeling that I wasn't as safe as before. On the morning of day 3, I was tired. I hadn't slept much. Every little sound had kept me awake, and my nerves were raw. I pushed forward anyway. The trail continued rough, climbing and dropping, winding through thickets that tore at my clothes. By midday, I realized something was wrong again. I should have reached a wide creek by then, according to the map, but I hadn't seen any sign of water. The terrain didn't match what I expected. I stopped, checked the map again and again, but nothing lined up. I must have taken a wrong turn somewhere. Panic started to creep in. I tried backtracking, scanning trees for old paint marks, but I couldn't find any. The more I looked, the more I realized I was completely off the trail. That was when the real fear set in. It's one thing to miss a marker for a few minutes. It's another to be deep in miles of forest with no clear path. I tried to think logically. I still had food, water, and gear. If I stayed calm, I could figure it out. I picked a direction I believed led downhill, hoping it would bring me to a stream or a road. Hours passed, and the forest grew thicker. Branches whipped my arms, the ground turned soft with moss, and my boots sank into mud. I tripped more than once, catching myself on trees. My legs grew heavy, and I felt myself slowing down. I found a small clearing and decided to stop for the night. I was exhausted. I set up my tent, ate a little food, and tried to rest. But that night was worse than the last. The forest seemed alive with noises, cracks, thuds, faint rustling in the brush. I lay still, my heart pounding at every sound, clutching my knife even though I knew it wouldn't do much. Sleep barely came. The next morning I knew I had to get serious. I couldn't just wander. I needed to find water because my bottles were nearly empty. I moved slowly, listening for running water. By noon I finally heard it, a faint trickle, and pushed through thick brush until I reached a narrow stream. Relief hit me hard. I refilled my bottles, filtered the water, and drank until my stomach ached. But being near the stream had its own problem. The ground was swampy, and moving along it was slow. I followed it anyway, hoping it would lead to a larger creek or river, maybe even to civilization. The day stretched on, and the forest pressed close. My arms and legs were scratched raw. My clothes clung to me with sweat. I slipped on wet rocks, nearly twisting my ankle. At one point, I thought I saw a faint boot print in the mud, but when I bent down, it was just an odd shape. That night, I built a small fire, even though I usually didn't like to. I needed the comfort of light. The flames flickered against the trees, making shadows dance. I sat close, eating slowly, feeling the fear gnaw at me. I didn't know where I was. I didn't know if I was heading the right way. The fourth day was worse. My legs ached so badly that every step felt like a punishment. Blisters burned on my heels. My food supply was almost gone, just a handful of trail mix and a few bites of jerky. The forest started to feel endless. Every ridge I climbed only showed more ridges ahead. My map was useless now. Nothing looked like it should. I knew I was lost far beyond the trail. I began to notice the signs of my body breaking down. My mouth stayed dry no matter how much water I drank. My hands shook when I tried to hold things. My thoughts grew hazy, drifting in and out of focus. I would stop and stare at the trees, realizing minutes had passed without me moving. On the evening of the fourth day, I stumbled across something that made my stomach clench. A torn piece of blue fabric was snagged on a branch, old and faded. I didn't know if it came from a hiker years ago or something else, but seeing it filled me with dread. I wasn't the first person to be lost out here. That night, I barely managed to set up my tent. My hands shook too much. I crawled inside, wrapped in my sleeping bag, listening to the forest. My stomach cramped from hunger, my head pounded, and fear sat heavy on my chest. I couldn't stop thinking about how far from home I was, how no one knew exactly where I had gone, how easily I could disappear into the trees without anyone ever finding me. On the fifth day, I woke weak and dizzy. I forced myself to keep moving, following the stream as best I could. My vision blurred sometimes, and I stumbled into trees. I don't know how long I walked, but at some point I noticed the forest thinning. The trees grew smaller, the undergrowth less dense. Then I saw it, a narrow dirt road, cutting through the trees. My heart jumped so hard I thought I might faint. I stumbled toward it, falling to my knees when I finally reached the packed earth. It was rough and empty, but it was a road, a sign of people. I dropped my pack and sat there, crying without sound, too weak to stand. After a while, I forced myself to walk, following the road. It wound through the trees for what felt like forever, but eventually I saw a wooden cabin in the distance, old but solid. I staggered to the door, collapsed on the steps, and sat there until an older man came outside. His eyes widened when he saw me, and though I couldn't speak much, he helped me inside, gave me water, and called for help. I was taken out of the forest later that day, weak and half-starved but alive. Doctors said I was close to collapse from exhaustion and dehydration. Could have ended differently if I hadn't found that road when I did.